What's up YouTube, Capital G here. Today I want to tell you guys a chilling story. A story of when Yu-Gi-Oh's first Ritual Powerhouse deck took control of the TCG for a month and left every opposing deck in ruin. It's a common misnomer amongst the Yu-Gi-Oh community that Arc V's Necros was the first ritual archetype to reign supreme in the game, and I think that it's time to finally correct that by telling a story of how DENISE OTK once dominated its way to a Shonen Jump Championship title. We're going back 10 years to the GX era. I think before I talk about the actual event, however, it's really important to discuss how chaotic the format really was, specifically in terms of what the meta entailed. I say that because diversity among the top tier competitive decks was pretty much at an all-time high in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! The March 2007 ban list was also a really big one, banning out a lot of GOAT format favorites like Magician of Faith, Graceful Charity, Breaker the Magical Warrior, and there were also some hits to Machine OTK cards, limiting cards like Giant Trunade, Overload Fusion. Lastly, Stratos went the one because if he didn't, man, all hell probably would have broke loose. But to be honest, in Konami's infinite wisdom, they decided to unban Snatch still, so that meant that all hell was going to break loose anyways. I think the easiest way to contextualize how all over the place the meta really was is by letting you know that over the next 7 Shonen Jump Championship tournaments, 7 different decks would actually win those events. Now just take a second to actually think about how crazy and diverse a format really has to be when you have no idea from one tournament to the next what's going to ultimately win the next Shonen Jump Championship. And if you're wondering, yes, this is the only time in Yu-Gi-Oh's history where anything remotely close to this has actually happened. Strike of Neos had just been released in the last week of February, and the new 6 Samurai archetype wasn't exactly off to the greatest start. A lot of people also criticized the final pieces of Dark World supports because they didn't actually improve the deck in any tangible way. However, Strike of Neos did give us one little comment that would completely change the fate of ritual decks forever: Advanced Ritual Art. We often see one card take decks to completely unimaginable levels like Spiral Double Helix and Gladiator Beast Grizaris, but ARA was a little different in the fact that it essentially created the DENISE OTK. Before the release of ARA, DENISE King of Armageddon was surely a good and powerful monster, but there were 2 major reasons why he never saw any competitive play and why essentially no one even bothered trying the card. Reason number 1, ritual decks were incredibly clunky and they just didn't have all the amazing support that you see in the game today. That made them a lot less consistent. Cards like Preparation of Rites, Ritual Sanctuary, none of these cards were out, and ritual decks were just a lot slower at the time. A serious far cry from what you'd expect from something like maybe Necros. Reason number 2, DENISE isn't really a ritual archetype. Sure, his wife, Ruin, Queen of Oblivion, was released in the same set, but those 2 cards don't have any synergy with each other, and they really do 2 completely different things. So they're husband and wife, but you wouldn't actually know it by looking at the cards themselves. And that also kind of goes without saying, since DENISE wasn't an actual archetype, what exactly were you supposed to fill the rest of the deck up with? Every ritual deck seemed to have this problem. Thanks to all of these questions, inconsistencies, and the fact that ritual archetypes didn't exist during the GX era, ritual decks as a whole were nothing more than table 500 at best. I guess you could say that the entire mechanic was basically in the toilet, but OCG players quickly learned that ARA fixed nearly every one of those problems overnight. Coming into the March 2007 format, I remembered hearing a bunch of rumblings online of some crazy ritual OTK deck from Japan that was causing a bit of an uproar. When the deck didn't make top 8 at Shonen Jump Houston at the beginning of the format, I just assumed that it was a failed OCG experiment. Well, obviously, as you can tell by the title of this video, I was, indeed incorrect. At the very next Shonen Jump in Columbus, the DENISE deck I had heard so much about actually broke through and made it all the way to top 8, and to my shock, it repeated this performance again, making top 8 at Shonen Jump Montreal just a few weeks later. While this was impressive and the deck at least proved that it deserved to be on the competitive radar of all duelists, many in the community wondered if this was the peak of the deck's potential. That question would be answered to no doubt at Shonen Jump Anaheim 2007, the next event after Montreal. At this point, the entire Yu-Gi-Oh community was aware of the Demise OTK deck's presence, and there wouldn't be any sneaking up on the competition. But with that said, it just didn't matter. It doesn't matter if you know your enemy's presence if you don't have the power to actually beat them, and that was on full display at Anaheim. That little Demise deck that everyone had been accustomed to just making top 8 and then immediately losing, that deck ended up making top 8 with 3 different players, which was the highest representation of any decks in top 8 cut. You see, the thing that Pure Monarchs, Perfect Circle Monarchs, and Level 4 Control anti-meta decks all had in common was not just their inability to OTK, but the fact that they all wanted to play a control grind game to win. That's the exact playstyle that Demise OTK preyed on. If the Demise deck could OTK the opponent in numerous ways, but never have to worry about getting OTK'd itself, the deck was going to be in a really good situation. This isn't a perfect comparison, but you can think of the Demise OTK deck as you would a wrestler like Randy Orton. Randy can be getting his ass kicked for 90% of a wrestling match, but one blink of an eye, boom, he hits you with the RKO and it's lights out, he ends up winning the match. However, it is very important to note that Demise wasn't the only tier 1 deck in the game at the time that had this type of knockout power. Diamond Dude Turbo and T-Hero both could easily one-shot you if given the opportunity, which is why most high-level Demise players leaned on the strategy of stalling until they had their OTK secured, then they'd go all in. It might sound quite strange, but 2 of the 3 Demise decks that made top 8 main deck tech like Swords of Revealing Light, Gravity Bind, Level Limit Area B, and even Scapegoat to make sure that they had long enough to assemble the pieces for their OTKs. If it wasn't clear at this point how the Demise deck actually pulled off its fame OTK, it went a little something like this. Demise would first be summoned off of Advanced Ritual Art. It would use priority when it hit the field to activate its effect and nuke the board. You then had a few paths to victory. All you needed to do was find 8,000 damage, of course. The most common would involve summoning Doom Dozer using the 2 level 4 bugs that you just dropped into the graveyard off ARA. You could also alternatively summon a copy of Metal Armored Bug that you just used for ARA instead of the 2 level 4 bugs with Premature Burial. And at that point, you basically just needed to find a damage amplifier for your final push. Megamorph and Metamorphosis were both ran in multiples in the Demise deck for the same goal, but they did it in different ways. Metamorphosis could turn a Demise into a Cyber Twin Dragon, thus taking that 2400 damage and essentially converting it into 5600, which if you combine that with the big bug that you had on your field, the 2800 Doom Dozer or Metal Armored Bug, that would give you a grand total of 8400 damage unless I'm mistaken. You could also use Megamorph to double the attack of the bugs and make them 5600, attacking with the bug first, and then Demise would finish your opponent off for the last 2400. That brings you to exactly 8,000 damage. Keep in mind, when you activated Demise's effect, you paid 2,000 life points, so you were almost always at a lower life point than your opponent. So that's why Megamorph was ran in multiples in the deck, and that's why Megamorph was such a valuable card back in the GX era. And actually, I think that I should note that even in worst case scenarios where you didn't have one of your damage amplifiers, there were still cards like Ring of Destruction and Premature Burial plus Giant True Nade Shenanigans that still made it possible to find 8,000 damage. And the fact is, Demise wasn't exactly the easiest thing to top deck against, so if your opponent wasn't OTK'd, they still had to deal with a Demise, and anything that didn't actually kill Demise was essentially pointless to put on the field because he was just going to blow up the field again and attack directly. When it was all said and done and the dust had finally settled at Shonen Jump Anaheim, only Michael Sonlok was left standing as he impressively 2-0'd Chris Bowling and his Diamond Dude Turbo deck in the finals. This was even more shocking because Chris main decked 2 copies of Threatening Roar, which should have been the exact tech that he needed to stop Demise from OTKing him, let alone that Chris would end up eventually being our US champion in a different year. He was no slouch, but I don't know, it just wasn't his day, I guess. Michael was also responsible for eliminating both of the other 2 Demise OTK deck players in top 8 en route to victory, so I don't know, something just tells me that this was destiny. A lot of people might find it hard to believe, but yeah, there was actually a time where a ritual-based OTK deck reigned supreme in the TCG, and as I've said before many times, the GX era was a lot slower than what people are used to and what we have today, and Demise and Cyberstein OTK decks were designed to prey on that fact. There were also no hand traps in the game. The only Solemn at the time cost half your life points. People didn't want to play Solemn Judgment because Ring of Destruction made it just way too dangerous to even mess around with Solemn. And also, effect negation was at a premium. There was really no good effect negation. No Veiler, no Fiendish Chain, no Lost Wind, none of those good cards that we have today. You combine that all together and you get a bunch of really strange stuff winning Shonen Jump championships at this time. So I hope you guys really did enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh story. Man, Demise is it's one of the few decks in Yu-Gi-Oh history that like really puts the fear of God in me. I don't even like seeing that card today because every time that card resolved, I just felt like I was going to lose. And it's really amazing because rituals were basically a joke mechanic, and with the release of Advanced Ritual Art, they just became instantly good with the combination of a bunch of bugs and Megamorph and Metamorphosis. And watching the Demise deck kind of pop off was really interesting, because it was a ritual deck, but you'd see it go into its extra deck and some infusions. A lot of decks at the time didn't even run an extra deck. Well, it wasn't even called the extra deck. It was just called the fusion deck back then. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this story. I do like doing my Yu-Gi-Oh stories. And if you guys did enjoy the video, just give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you guys thought in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already. And of course, turn on those notifications for daily videos.